Welcome to episode number 5 of the Art of Possible podcast, where our guest for the day is Anand Murali, aka Andy, who currently works at Olympic Gold Quest, which is a company that was established to get India more gold medals at the Olympics, which to me is the cleanest mission statement I've ever heard of. It's quantifiable, it's very, very straightforward, and it immediately tells you exactly what that organization is about.
Yeah, but I feel like Andy did engineering. Just like about I think about 70-80% of like Indian kids who grow up in sort of middle class families and their parents give them two or three options when they're growing up. They're like, oh, you get decent grades. What do you want to do when you grow up? You have two options. Do you want to be a doctor or do you want to not be a doctor and then you can just do engineering? Which is my story, which is not your story. I'm guessing that I'm assuming was also the way that you got into engineering, Andy, or was it more passion driven?
It was definitely not forced onto me. I think I always
Okay.
had it was my choice to make, and I think that kind of has stayed through ever since I was a child growing up. I think I was always it was not this or that. It was always what do you want to do, see what you want to do, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I do think that more than from my family side, it was what my friends were doing. It's what I saw everyone else around me doing, and I think around the time when I was finishing school, I didn't have like clear ideas on what I wanted to do. So I think it made sense that might as well do engineering. At least like I'll find work after graduating if nothing kind of works out. So that's how I
Yeah.
got into engineering. There was no pressure per se from home. I would say peer pressure
Yeah.
more than pressure from home. But like yeah, I think those 4 years were like very unremarkable, and in terms of from an academic perspective, it really was unremarkable.
It's so interesting that your surroundings and your environment has such a remarkable impact on
Yeah.
what you choose to do with your life from such a young age. It's probably not very to say that if you're in an environment where you constantly feel inspired, if you're in an environment where you're asked to take more risks,
Yeah.
if you're in an environment that is more nurturing, then you just turn out to be different versus if you're in an environment where you're told that there's only one path of life and you have to follow it. Anything else that is a departure from that path is probably wrong for me to do and I shouldn't be doing it at all.
I also think that comes with a certain level of privilege that you need to be afforded when you're growing up. Seen a lot of people
Yeah.
who perhaps that was the way to go about life, not take too many risks because there's not much to fall back on, for example. I'm not saying that was the case with me, not at all. I do think I could have chosen a different path if I had to. But like in general,
Yeah.
society at large, I think you tend to take more risks if you know you have like cushion to fall back on, and I think that makes a huge difference in terms of who can afford to take risks versus who cannot. So I think it didn't play out that way in my case at all. Mine was I completely take full kind of responsibility for the decisions I made. I was given full freedom, but yeah, I understand why a lot of people are not able to make those choices.
When did your first would you say that your like sports is a big part
Yeah.
of your life and that it has been that way since you were
Yeah,
a
you know,
kid?
when we had the conversation before we kind of got on this podcast, you told me to like think about some aspects of growing up. 100%. I think I come from a very, very sporty family. My brother used to play cricket at the national level. My dad was an athlete himself growing up. So sport was very, very like deeply ingrained in all of us growing up. In fact, like I think I would say my mom also, but like my dad, he wouldn't care too much if I didn't do well at school in terms of like studying and marks and all that. But like if I didn't play every day or train every day or like go to the ground and play, I think like he would get pissed off at that. So I got told off more often for like slacking on the field than in the classroom. So that it was a huge part of my childhood. I think a lot of those value systems that I have, certain principles that I learned at a very young age, I think a lot of that has stood me in good stead even when I'm a lot older now. Weirdly though, when I was a lot younger, I didn't. Once you reach your teen years, 15, 16, 17, you have like dreams of playing sport at a really high level, representing your country, all of that. I'm sure a lot of us had dreams. I don't know. We saw athletes on TV and like we wanted to be like them. Wanted like the national anthem to play in the background, and you know all those kinds of dreams. But I think when I was a lot younger, it was purely fun and like sweating it out and like just come home like a dirty pig. I think that was be all and end all for me growing up. So it was a huge part. it's not restricted to one sport. Dad encouraged us to play a lot of sport, try out different sports at a really young age. School was very cooperative and supportive of that. So I think I lucked out in terms of the environment that I had. To give you guys an example, it was never like, maybe I am digressing a little bit from what you brought up, Laksh, but it was never do well in class, only then you'll be allowed to play, or like none of those, nothing was conditional. It doesn't matter if you sucked in class or not, you still kind of have to go and play. And the same thing, it doesn't matter if you do well in sport or not, what has to happen in the classroom has to happen anyway. So I think that was very reassuring for me growing up. I think it was really cool to have family, relatives, and like a school that was supportive of some of these choices that you made for yourself.
That's very interesting. So you grew up in a super sporty environment, encouraging sports.
Yeah.
What was your answer then to like if somebody asked you what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah. I think it would change every year. Like I don't think I had
Yeah.
like a fixed response to that. It was very whimsical. But I think, I was just discussing with a dear friend and we were kind of talking about this. I think I was very patriotic in the conventional sense growing up. Like I would draw pictures of myself in like army uniforms and like imagine myself as part of the armed forces or the police force. So I think that would be my standard response with a few variations here and there based on what my mood was like. That kind of stayed until like my mid-teens, I would say 15, 16. I felt like I wanted to be there. But then of course after that, when I did fairly decently at sport, I wouldn't say like I see big success, in my teens as a student athlete or a junior athlete. But I think it gave me enough encouragement to think perhaps I could have like a future playing sport for a living. So I think in my mid-teens, my focus entirely turned towards trying to play sport at a high level and like go after that really. Did you guys think that way as well? Like the armed forces and growing up, you wanted to?
So in my case, I had a phase where, so my dad's
First.
ex-Air Force and my mother's an IS officer. So I always had like this
Yeah.
India thing ingrained in me to a large extent. And I grew up surrounded by Independence Day parades, Republic Day parades. It was a big part of my life for sure. Like went around in a car that had a lion on the bonnet or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So it was definitely like a big deal. I felt like I was discouraged from joining the armed
Yeah.
forces for sure, but definitely not joining the civil services. That was like
Yeah.
a big push
Yeah.
from my parents. There was a phase where I, for slightly different reasons, did consider joining the Air Force, because one of the only ways that somebody can go to space outside of having a PhD in physics or shit like that is if they are a test pilot. And I'd read a book about test pilots which just made them look like the most badass motherfuckers on the planet, right? Like they have an incredibly dangerous job, an incredibly high fatality rate, but there is one thing that characterizes all of them, which is this really stupid, right? Like in the sense that they will take risks that the average person will not, and that's what makes them good for testing out fighter planes. Because in the craziest situations, when you're in a dogfight and you have to do like all kinds of insane maneuvers, that plane cannot fail you, which is why you need a test pilot to make sure that happens, that every single possibility is taken care of before the plane is ever put to field. But yeah, it was a big thing for me that at some point I want to do something revolutionary that definitely puts India on the map, right? And the way I connected the dots was I wanted it to have something to do with space. And I felt like, okay, Air Force, space, maybe I'll become a test pilot, right? But then as I grew older, that sort of just fell by the wayside and turned into different things.
I want to say something. That did you always say I want to be an astronaut when I grew up?
For sure. Astro architect. Like I want to make the first moon colony, like design where everything will be. And that probably came from like playing Age of Empires and
Yeah.
building bases and shit. But yeah, national service, would you say that that's still a part of why you do what you do today?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's taken on a different meaning from what it used to. It's not like that rage-fueled, hardcore kind of narrative that I kind of buy into anymore. But yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it comes from exposure, and I think we'll talk about it, over the course of this conversation as well. Like I think access and exposure is such a huge part of like what you can even think can be done or think is possible. I'll say if I didn't have the exposure to the opportunities that I've had over the years. In fact, I would flip it and say because of the opportunities and exposure I've had, I'm able to connect the dots better. I'm able to see how this ties down to like my idea of patriotism on like whatever keeping national interests like from back in the day, I think. But I don't think when I got into it, I don't think I saw it like that. But I think in retrospect, I'm able to see it a little bit like that.
So when you were at SRM, during those 3-4 years,
Yeah.
did you go through like periods of time where? So I'll give you context for this, right? Both me and Ronit went to VIT.
Yeah.
So
Was.
similar to you, which is
Yeah.
So like private engineering college in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
I think like
In the south
the
of
two of us
India.
definitely knew. Yeah, we did not want to do
Yeah.
engineering,
Yeah.
right? And so at times it felt like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like a large part of the struggle was just thinking about, if not this, then what? How did that play out for you in those 3-4 years?
Again, dude, I think I was lucky because while I was doing my engineering, I was a sports quota student. So I was an athlete majorly. I didn't have to like be in class a lot. I didn't have to like appear for internals a lot. All of that would be given. I would just have to like turn up for the final exams. For the first 3 years of my college life, I mean, like I didn't really know my professors. I didn't like really know. I didn't have to. Like I would pass. It was a private university, right? So I still got to play a lot of sports, socialize, make new friends. I think that way college was fun, but like, I think, when you get into your final year, when you kind of, I think for every student athlete also, I think in India at least that's the case. When you are about to finish college, you kind of make a choice as to whether you want to continue playing sport, try kind of grinding it out in sport, figure out what else to do. I think when I finished my third year, I was in my final year, I had an injury. I had like an injury because of which I was kind of cut from the team, bad shoulder injury. And basically the physical director's point, which I was pissed, but to be fair was, if I'm not playing, I need to be in class at least. Like I can't not do either. So that's when I realized I didn't enjoy. So I had to be in class for prolonged periods, end of 6th sem and starting of 7th sem. I was like, dude, this sucks. I cannot can do this for the rest of my life. I think a lot of that I realize is not because of the subject itself, but I genuinely think, I don't think it was taught well. I don't think they made you like enjoy the subject. I think it's entirely the teacher's responsibility to make sure someone like enjoys the subject. So anyway, that's for slightly later. But luckily, because of my injury, I would actually credit a lot of what happened after to the injury that I went through. So suddenly my weekends are free, no training, cut from the team. So I'm like, what do I do with my weekends and like spare time now? Because before all of that was either in training or recovery or playing matches or whatever. So I had a senior. So this was in my 6th sem. He was about to pass out. Really good friend of mine. I was like, dude, I don't know what to do. I'm super bored. So he was volunteering in a school at that time where he was teaching kids arts. And he was like an artist and he was good at it. He's like, do you just want to come with? Like I go every Saturday and yeah, you can like you sign up for different programs. There's art, there's theater, music, dance. I chose sport. But then I was like, to kill time on the weekends, I went to this school, government school, to like teach kids to play different sports and like to get them be physically active. Just like 8-9-year-old kids. And I did this for a few weeks and I realized it was so much fun. There was actually a point when I would just wait for the 5 days to pass during the week. So on Saturdays I could go like play with the kids. And at that point I hadn't really considered a career like working with kids or anything like that. But it was just cool, like you hang out with like really young people. There's a lot of banter. They take to you really quickly and you have that kind of bond that forms in a really short period of time. And even then I didn't really think of it. But then that organization that I was working for, that NGO, was actually partnering with TFI. So some of the TFI folks got that NGO to like do extracurricular activities for the kids at school. So they got to know I was a final year student and they're like, what do you think you want to do and all that. So after conversations with them, even then I was like, cool, like in your final year, you sit for placements at all your Infosys, Cognizant, Wipro, whatever. I obviously like didn't have the kind of grades to crack like your whatever core companies that come for placements. But I hadn't told my parents because I knew they might be pissed initially. Like I didn't want to like thrust it upon them before the process was even done. So I said, cool, I'll see, I'll apply, I'll see if I get in. And if I get in and I decide to take it, then I'll deal with like parents and telling family and all of that. Because it wasn't the conventional route to take. I had written my GRE at the time. typical Tamil household where the plan is you do your 2-year masters abroad and then like do a job and like get a job in Google or Facebook or what. Like that's what I mean. I was fine with it. Like I thought that's what it was going to be. Um, but then this was a fairly long process, several essays, multiple interviews, and like whatever. That took like a good 3-4 weeks. And then like randomly, I got a call saying I got in. And because I was not hopeful of getting in, like I just thought I'm chuma applying on the side. But like I think once I got in, that's when I realized shit, I have a decision to make. Like I was just fucking around until now. I wasn't like really giving it serious thought. But like now that I've gotten into the fellowship, do I really want to do this? So I think that's how this college academic transition to like TFI
That's
happened.
it. For those of us who don't know about TFI, tell us a little bit more about what it is. What is the fellowship?
It's a 2-year full-time program. It's mostly aimed at young professionals, although like I was really inspired to see like people quitting their jobs mid-career, people who retire and then choose to do the fellowship. A lot of people like that as well. But basically, it's a teaching program. So the goal of the program is to one expose young graduates, young people to like the reality of the education system, grassroots education system, public education system that most of us are kind of oblivious to. Like a lot of us go to good schools, good exposure, like we forget. Yeah, so you're oblivious to a whole other life that exists outside your bubble. So like first thing is to expose you to like what really happens in the country in terms of education. I think the second thing is, I think leadership through teaching. I think that was their idea of like, so the larger goal of the fellowship was not, I mean, sure, you're in a classroom, you learn a lot of things in the classroom by working with the kids, but I think their long-term vision was to expose people to this experience so that they go on to continue working with the education system in different capacities. A lot of people go into, some people continue to teach, make a career out of teaching. Some people work in policy. Some people go into teacher training. Some people do school leadership. So you suddenly realize after you're a teacher in 2 years in either low-income private school or a government school, exposes you to a lot of things, and then you realize there's a whole other world that you can access because of this experience. So I think that was the biggest goal of this. This actually started, it's been adopted to the Indian context, but Teach for America is probably the organization that started it first. And now there are offshoots in several countries. I think the Teach for Dash model exists in about 50, 60 countries by today, if I'm not wrong.
What sport did you play?
I used to play cricket. I played at the junior state level, at the university level. You know, when I said there are two paths you can choose, you can either kind of continue trying to play or you can kind of figure out what else is out there for you. I was doing well. I mean, I wouldn't say I was on the cusp of something bigger, but I was still I still had skin in the game. If I had persisted, maybe I could have kind of gone on to do better things in my career as sport. I think at that time, from a sport point of view, I think I lacked a little bit of self-belief at that time. I was like not sure if I would be able to crack it, because of like just how intense competition is. And, external ecosystem. I don't like saying politics because that feels like the easy escape to give. Like you get into a system knowing fully well what's there in the system. So like, not pointing fingers or anything, but I think genuinely lacked thoda self-belief at the time, which I wish I had worked on at the time. I feel like the mental aspect of sport, I don't think I did it well enough. Defense, my dad took an early retirement. Like weirdly, although like my parents have never asked a thing of me as to like, hey, like, you know what, like you should kind of do something that, but I think at that time I was thoda old enough also to think, okay, my parents are getting older, like maybe I should take this route to, to have like that fallback option. Like I said, I think that's the reason why I kind of took that. No regrets though.
So when you say the mental aspect of sports, right? What all does that involve? So I know this from like a very like the preface here is I know fucking nothing about sports other than like just
Yeah.
watching a lot of MMA and looking at highlight reels of Jordan and Kobe and Ronaldo and shit. But um,
Yeah. Yeah.
from what I understand, like a lot of it has to do with things like visualization, like um, because one
Sure.
question that I always had in my mind was, what was Joe Wilfried Songa thinking when he, faced Nadal and beat him, right? Like
Yeah.
if you, okay, let's say I'm building a startup, right? If you put me head to head with Mark Zuckerberg or something like that, I would shit myself, for the lack of
Yeah.
better language, right? So what exactly goes into that mental conditioning
Yeah, man.
aspect?
I think I have a much better understanding now because I've been lucky to work in the high performance space for the last few years, and I wish I'd had this information when I was growing up. And I wish the coaches who worked with me and like the seniors who worked with me understood what this really meant. Uh, I think growing up, the consensus was, I don't know if you guys will kind of relate to it, but like for me, it was either, you would always hear this comment: he has the game, he has the talent, but like not able to crack the mental aspect of
Yeah.
it. It was always perceived as something that you either had or you did not have. You either had it in you to deal with like pressure situations in sport mentally, or you just didn't have it. I mean, this I can speak from a personal experience space, and also I would say general perception at that time. But now I know better. I feel like just like how you go to the gym and like train your body, how you work on your skill, these are set of skills that can be learned. Sure, everybody will have different proficiencies at it. People might take different kind of time frames to master or like get better at these skills, but these are like pure quantifiable skills that you can learn. It's not science. It's not fully science, at least. There's definitely science in it, but you can't say, okay, you learn these skills, you'll be the mentally the most toughest athlete in the world. But it gives you belief that this is a skill that can be learned. And I think it's great to see a lot of athletes today kind of get that support. We still have a long way to go in terms of like preparing athletes mentally, but it's definitely not like binary. It's not you either have it or you don't. You can get better at it.
What?
Like you said, visualization is a tool that they use. It's a skill that they have. Basically, the it's like how we go to psychologists for therapy. They help us understand our patterns. They kind of work with us to design like solutions that work for us to deal with our situations in life better. Exactly the same happens in sports. Sports psychologists work with athletes to prepare them and train them on these skills.
What are some of these
Yeah.
skills, and how do they train them today, which you think would have really helped back in the day, like given that you've
Yeah.
gone around the world and you've seen how high performance
Yeah.
coaches actually implement this? So
Yeah.
just wanted to get a sense of that.
Yeah, I just want to qualify. I want to say, not trained in psychology. I'm not an
Yeah.
expert on psychology. This is purely from what I've seen, kind of people, experts work with athletes. I think so. Basically, Abhilaksh, it starts with self-awareness for a lot of athletes, to understand themselves, understand their own personalities, understand their reactions to different situations. In certain sports, understanding their breathing patterns. So I think the first layer, and the weird thing is you don't need to be an elite athlete, super professional athlete to kind of. It's like these are like your warm up and cool down of anything that an athlete like a budding athlete does at like 13, 14, right? So they help athletes identify their own emotions. What are you feeling at this point? Because like how old were all of us when you first realized what I was feeling was actually anxiety, right? Like it's the same with athletes as well. They're not able to put like words on what they're feeling. So to kind of give young athletes, so it's basically they will equip them with a set of tools that they can use in different situations to be more self-aware, to react better in different situations, to reflect on how they did, what they can do better. It's not. That's what I'm saying. It's not like a magic potion that kind of gets given to athletes where they shoot like that, right? Like it's very gradual, linear, and these are very simple things that like athletes typically not big athletes, but like a lot of athletes these days journal every day. They just write down how I felt during the session, what did I do well, what can I do better. In the professional world, we probably we call this with a different name, but like athletes journal every day to kind of record how they felt, what their mood is like when they came to training. They also try and understand what is affecting their mood. Is it, didn't they sleep well? Is it like the fear of the opponent? So I think these small tools, but like when they pile up, it becomes like an entire toolkit, and athletes are able to kind of use that better.
So, emotional awareness and understanding one's own patterns, how the different factors like diet, exercise, things that happened in my personal life, etc.,
Yeah,
impact my game, right? And getting more of a sense of when I'm on the field, what affects me the most, right? Is it that I'm
yeah.
afraid of the opponent, afraid of outcomes, things like that? Okay, so
Abhilaksh, I would just also add on and say, like while I work in the high performance space where like the goal is to win Asian Games, Commonwealth Games, World Championship, then the like, that's the, you can almost call it like cutthroat, and where unless, I mean, if you don't make it, then you're not going to make it, like that kind of environment, right? But I also think what really, because I work with coaches, it also means these coaches train elite athletes, they train intermediate level athletes, they train beginner athletes, or they have junior coaches who they train to train like beginner athletes. So like I am also really, what kind of gives me joy about this is these are not just tools that you use in sport to excel at the highest level. Like imagine a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid through sport and through mental training skills, understanding their own patterns, being more self-aware, reflecting on situations, reacting to pressure, even if they don't go on to win, because everybody trains on these skills. So like somebody is going to win. Even otherwise, I think these are certain skills that will stand them in good stead when they grow up. I think that's really exciting.
This is very topical because, to your point about that, these mental skills can help all of us outside of sports, even in normal life. Like an example that I've been doing is I'm preparing for this test. I'm actually preparing for the GRE. I want to apply to business school. The content for the test is not really riveting. Not really like, oh my god, I'm so excited to like study prime numbers today. It's gonna change my life, or I'm gonna learn these words. And so
Yeah,
whenever I'm engaging with the material, I start thinking of other things. I zone out, I engage with it passively. And
yeah,
what I've started doing is I flip to the back of my notebook and just start writing, what am I feeling right now? I write down, why am I feeling that? Am I distracted because and I write it to myself, I'm distracted because I'm thinking about this deliverable that I have to submit at work tomorrow. And I'm thinking that I would rather
yeah,
do that now instead of studying. And then I write a justification that convinces me of why I should be studying right now instead of doing that deliverable. And when I write it down, it sort of like just goes away. Like I've written it down on paper and then I turn around and then I start doing it. And that thought it's sort of like it was in my head and it's been put on paper and it's away. And I didn't read it anywhere. I sort of came up with it. And I almost feel like I came up with it quite late, but there are probably resources that I could have accessed for me to have
yeah,
learned this a lot before. Or maybe there are resources that I can access that give me other tools that add on to this, like you're saying, and probably
yeah,
make me more effective in managing these thoughts, that just how they can help athletes. And I think to your second point about how this is not a magic potion, I feel like sometimes when we're given new tools, like for example, physical in athletics is a lot of focus, right? And it's always historically been the focus. And like
yeah,
you're saying, the mentality is something that you either have or don't have. And now when athletes have started focusing on mentality, the expectation is it's a magic potion. It's not, because when it comes to physical training, it's the same logic, right? You're given the best physical training and you get to a certain point, and that sort of tries to level the playing field in terms of training. And then after that, it's just like pure performance on a certain day. And that's the same thing with mental training as well. Like you get to a certain point with that mental training, and then it's pure performance on a certain day and how you do it. So it's not a magic
yeah,
potion. It has to be seen from that same element that you see physical training, that it can get you to a certain level
yeah.
and help you, give you the certain tools and help solve those impediments to your overall performance.
End of the day, ability does, like not everybody has the same ability, and it's it's nobody's fault. Like it is what it is. Like I think you can constantly try to get better. You can use different tools. You can rely on scientific advances to give yourself the best chance of performing when it matters. Like at the end of the day, when everything is equal, that's what you try for, right? You try to become physically as strong as you can, mentally as strong as you can, because you know at the highest level, the person on the other side is also going to do the exact same. They would have also like spent several years trying to kind of figure this out. And yeah, on the day, it's who can.
Taking it back, right, to Andy again. You grew up in sports. You had this idea that linked to patriotism and linked to sports. You went to university on a
Yeah,
sports quota, and then you found TFI, and then you started teaching sports. So, what was the experience of teaching sports like? How was it different from being an athlete? And what did
yeah.
that make you feel versus actually playing the sports yourself?
What exactly were you teaching at TFI?
I'll tell you. Yeah. No, I think maybe I'll share a little bit about the journey and like perhaps a little bit on the sport aspect of that particular journey as well. The first thing was excitement, man. Like I think so before the fellowship starts, there are like 700, 800 people who get accepted into the program. I don't know what the numbers are today, but that year it was 600, 700, I think. And we have like a 1 month kind of induction program in Pune that happens in Pune. 1 month long party, and you're having a lot of fun. You're meeting new people.
Yeah.
You're learning a lot of. You're challenging yourself because like I'd never taught in a classroom until that day, and then like you realize what a hard thing to do. Like being a good teacher is. I know a lot of people say again, people have the art versus science. Some people are naturally good at it. I also think set of strategies, tools, science behind it can be learned for you to become a better teacher. Of course, there are some natural aspects of your personality that comes through. So anyway, I was super excited because I had a small taste of this when I was volunteering in college. Hour and a half on Saturday mornings with the kids. So now I wanted to see what it was like to spend 40 hours a week with the kids. So I got placed in a government school once we got back from our training in Pune, in Chennai. And the community that I taught in was centered. So the school was very close to the biggest graveyard in the city. Like anybody dies, you get buried in that crematorium or graveyard. The kids that I was working with, the students, they were very accustomed to seeing death every day. Like that was, it was very normal for them to see because it was an everyday thing. Some of their parents had like shops outside the crematorium. Some of them might have worked in the. I'm not sure about this actually. But yeah, they all lived in that community. I would see a lot of hopelessness, dismissive attitude of sorts towards like enjoying things, doing well for yourself, all those things. At least that was my understanding of it during my time there. Happy kids, like I loved the energy that I like. You know, I would come in my bike and like 10 kids would run to me in school and like give me a high five and like tell me something that happened at home or whatever. So I would reach home early and, you know, like the first thing that I took out of that was this is such a happy, positive, energetic place to like spend your weekend. Second thing obviously was, I was lucky because, you know, a lot of fellows, a lot of people who get placed in different government schools, a lot of your experience depends on the support that you get from your principal. Abhilaksh, you understand the bureaucracy, the additional education officer and the education secretary of the government. And like, you know, it's an entire chain that kind of percolates down. It could either be like amazing and your principal can give you full freedom to say, you know what, I kind of believe that you have good ideas, do what you want. Or they might say, you know, use the textbook. I'll come and sit in your class. This is what you have to teach and fuck off. That also can happen. I was lucky with a really enthusiastic principal, I would say, who gave us full freedom to try out different things, experiment, etc. So that was another added incentive. Another thing that was interesting, exciting was it kind of gave me perspective at least. Like, you know, I grew up in a typical, I would say, middle class, lower middle class income family, not aware of my caste privilege at the time at all. Like, in fact, whatever. A lot of my views changed after working in a government school. I was very, like, before that, I was very, like, anti-reservations, kind of. I thought, like, I had it, like, you know, I was unlucky and, like, you know, all of that. Like, I would compare my standard of life to, like, some of my other friends who I thought to be like, oh, tere paas to sab kuch hai, lucky hai, mere paas ye. Oh, you know, that kind of attitude. And, like, when you kind of start working there, it feels like you understand that you didn't have the bad end of it at all. Like, not to say, oh, like now I'm super fortunate and like whatever, but like that kind of put things into perspective as to like how challenging and difficult life might be for like other people. And the challenge was obviously like the kids' education wasn't, parents couldn't afford their best education, best facilities in terms of food, in terms of like kids falling sick all the time. These Thomas Edison stories that we were taught about reading from underneath the bulb. Those were probably like true stories for like the children that I taught. Like, like that's kind of like life. And the interesting thing was for them that was life, that was normal life. There was no like, oh, like I'm like unlucky and all that. So super happy set of kids that I got to work with. Really had a like wonderful time with them. And obviously, like I got better as a teacher. I started seeing success in class. Kids were more confident, and not just academically. Kids were more confident. Learning English as a language to communicate in was one of the big objectives for them to kind of prepare them for life beyond school and into college and all that. So we were seeing that their communication skills were getting better. Outside of the academic stuff, obviously, like, dude, I sucked at like art and music and dance and all that, like right from when I was a kid. Sport was the only thing I was good at. So I was like, fuck it, I'm making all of y'all play every day. So initially what started off as whatever, I would procure some equipment, buy some whatever balls and like whatever, I would just make sure that they played every day. Slowly I started seeing that like obviously like the boys were more excited about playing, and sometimes some girls would play, some of them would like not want to play, or like they would shy away from playing because like somebody else would make fun of them or like whatever, right? I realized while this was fun, this wasn't like, it should be fun for sure, but I was looking for opportunities as to whether I could make it more than just fun and like have like structured sport education programs for the kids. Kind of, we worked with another organization called Just for Kicks, who were running football programs. So this thing was leadership through sport for kids. Programs for kids up in different cities. So they'll have zonal competitions, and if you win that, you go to the nationals and like whatever. So like a good year and a half, I saw. I think I'm finally answering your question, Laksh, in terms of like what role sport played in the fellowship. It was not just the change that I saw in the kids, but also the community. I'll just tell you guys a small story. So whatever football program every day, kids would first though attendance rates improved because I would schedule football practice at the end of the day. So if you want to be in practice, you have to come to school. Because the kids were under 10, under 11, it was like they would train mixed group. And like I could see like the boys and girls kind of work with each other more closely, which would not be the case otherwise. Lack of coherence. Then I saw that they were actually getting better at the sport, and that gave them confidence. Like I feel when you're good at something, you feel confident. When people internally also you feel okay, like I'm good at this skill, somebody's appreciating me for it. So that makes you want to come back again and play. So confidence was getting better. The training program is done, and then they sign up for tournaments. There's a boys tournament, girls tournament. This was the societal angle of it. Like parents are not okay with their girls wearing shorts and playing. Simple thing. Because football, you play in shorts. Training though, they would come in track pants. But when they had to go play matches, we had to like get them jerseys and like get them to wear shorts. The parents were not okay with it. So we had to like go to a lot of the kids' house and say, like it's a safe environment. I know where you're this. And, it's important. So for me as well, there's a big learning in terms of how to handle these situations. It's super easy to come from like a place of, oh, you guys are super aggressive and like, why are you like ruining your daughter's future? But also important to be mindful of the context, their experiences, lived experiences, which should not be invalidated.
Yeah.
So to work with the parents and the larger community to say, it's fine. You can come watch them play. You'll feel proud, and like, those conversations. So having the community on our side was a big win. And like for me, the biggest impact of it all was, so obviously like the boys did well, but they didn't qualify for the nationals. They lost in the semis or whatever, but the girls went on to win the under 10 girls division. So now the new challenge was to get them to go. So the finals was in Bombay. The nationals was in Bombay, where the winners of each zone in the country would kind of go there. And I was surprised. I was like, damn, now they've won it. Now we have to figure out a way to take them to Bombay. First issue was with the school, and they're like, how can we let you take a group of girls? So I had to convince another female teacher to come with me to travel, whatever, fundraise for the expenses, flight tickets for each of the girls. None of them had ever been on a plane before. Again, get the parents on board. Unfortunately, a couple of parents, they never budged, and those girls weren't able to come. But like, we did convince a lot of the parents to send their kids to play. And like, you can sense the nervousness. They had never left their town without their parents or without like a relative. Now they're going 11-year-old kids going by themselves to play like a football game in a different city, Bombay, big city, intimidating, all of that. They went there. It was we had a lot of fun. They obviously, I mean, they lost. They didn't. They lost first round in the nationals, but for them to get there itself was huge in terms of their confidence. And I'm not talking about it from like a sporting achievement thing, self belief that it gave them. The kind of suddenly when they came back from that trip, they were no longer like whatever. They felt like they had an identity in terms of, okay, we represented the zone in football, so there's a larger identity to me. And like, you could also see like, the bigger kids in school would come and appreciate them. There was like an award ceremony for the girls in the assembly, like small things. But I feel like these are the opportunities and exposure things that I was talking about early on. Like, for us, we may take it for granted. Like, kuch to, and it's not like this is a recognized AIFF ka national tournament. This is some private organization conducting this in a bunch of different schools, getting a group of kids together to play, to learn, have fun, develop certain values, skills, etc. But just that feeling of, okay, मैंने अभी कुछ कर लिया. I don't think I can quantify those things. So that's how I tried to keep sport as a very big part of kind of my teaching life in the fellowship as well. So I think that was the experience I wanted to share, Abhilaksh.
I'm at a loss for words. Like, that was like riveting. Honestly, like I can't even imagine being in that position because, like, since I was a child, I've had the privilege of just like I never really thought about how rare that is in this world to be able to see the world outside of where you were born, right?
Yeah.
For so many people to go out there on your own and like experience all these different things. And it's got to be like, and now that I look back, right, it has definitely changed my life in immeasurable ways. Just 1 year spent in the US as a child completely shifted my own outlook. Like, I've always thought of myself more as like a global citizen rather than an India citizen because of that, right? Like, my horizon is just a lot wider. So and it's just I take that for granted. I don't really think about it. Like, listening to you talk about like what it was like for these girls, right? Who and like so many barriers were involved in getting them out of there. The parental barrier, societal barrier, personal mental conditioning, right? Like, oh my god, I'm going to be without them. I'm going to be on a plane. Like,
what made it even more challenging was the fact that everybody was well-meaning. I'll never hold it against, like, I don't know if I was like a parent of a 10-year-old girl child, like, to just send them with somebody to a different city when I've never moved out. Or like, if I'm the head of the education department for the state, you would know, like, you're the one who has, like, something goes wrong, you have to take the fall, or like you're held culpable. They knew I was well-meaning. I knew like all the other stakeholders were well-meaning, but still, how can we like kind of work together to figure out a solution for that? I think the fact that they were all on board in terms of intentions was what made it more challenging. It would have been perhaps easier if like they had their personal agendas and intentions. I just want,
And it also feels like every time you try to do like, and this is when we recognize our own privilege, which is every time we're trying to do something, we come up with this new impediment, which in your case was when you're going into like trying to get those girls to the national, you suddenly face
yeah,
this impediment of like parents not allowing their girls to go. And I don't know, maybe for a lot of people listening to this podcast, it will almost be like
yeah,
is that even an impediment? Like, you've never even thought of that. And then
yeah,
you recognize this is an actual impediment in people's lives, that they have to jump through this hoop to just get to the
yeah,
finals, versus a lot of other people are just getting there in the easiest possible way. There's a tailwind that is putting people into that finals, versus like these people have this huge gush of wind against them, a headwind that's blowing that they have to walk through.
Dude, but also what school was, it's not to say that I did all the convincing. You know, all the teachers, all of us, we knew it would have more weightage if it came from the girls themselves, if they could go and talk. So I think, you know, it helps them kind of tell them, hey, I want to do this, so I want to do this, so let me do this kind of thing. So those conversations that forget the football, forget the sport, all of that, right? But for them to go to a principal and say, you know, when the status quo is to not like raise your voice and like complain and argue with like someone who's as senior as a school principal, to do that at 10 years old and say whatever, write a letter and request her to, you know, those, I think those intangibles is what I look back upon with way more fondness.
It's interesting to me that you spent such a significant portion of your Teach for India tenure in using sports to uplift these kids, right? And getting them access to opportunities and perspectives that they never had before. Do you think that carried over into OGQ? And like, how did you first hear of OGQ, and like, how did you end up joining them, and what was that process like?
Again, dude, like I said, like how TFI was unexpected, and like, you know, sometimes you say, like, you get an opportunity and obviously like you have to follow through and take these opportunities. Like, I think when I was volunteering, I could have left it at volunteering and like joined somewhere else. But I think where I will give myself little credit for is to follow up on those opportunities. But I think like with TFI, certain doors opened up for me to know that there is something, you know, like OGQ. This was pandemic time. After TFI, I'd become a teacher trainer. I was training teachers in Bombay to implement early childhood literacy and numeracy curriculum in their classroom. So I'd moved on to mentoring teachers in Bombay. I really liked the job. Loved the organization I worked for. Great friends. I had absolutely no complaints. But again, non-profit, COVID, funds dried up. Existence of the organization is under threat. A lot of us are asked to move on, and I want to say that out of all the layoff stories I've heard during the pandemic, to be a non-profit and to say, you know what, we have like 4 months more of capital left, so we'll give you all 3-4 months to figure out what you want to do. It's not like tomorrow you're going, but like they gave us a good heads up. I think they did it as well as they possibly could. So this was June 2020, but then I had like a back injury at the time, so I decided to quit anyway and like go back home for a few months. And no plans, nothing. I was like, I'll take a break for a couple of months, eat ghar ka khana. Like I've slogged enough in Mumbai for 5 years. Tiny houses, terrible luck with getting cool landlords. Multiple house changes, all of that, man. Ronit, I think you know.
I think it's for those of us who haven't lived in Bombay, I feel like the easiest parallel to draw would be living in a city, maybe like New York or something like that, but in some ways even harder. Like it's I whenever I explain it to my friends in Melbourne here, I'm like, Mumbai is a city of 23 million people, which is almost the population of all of Australia. That is 1/50th the size of Melbourne. All the cities, all the problems that come with that, but also all the beauty that comes with it. I feel like it's a city where, like, when you stand, I feel like that city, when you look at the skyline and you look at it, you just think of like possibilities and you think of like what you can achieve. So it's like that same idea where you get hit by like these things from the city that you just don't want to deal with, but then you still find yourself just being there, being like, this city makes me feel great things. It makes me feel inspired, and there's possibility here, and that's why I want to stay here. And that's probably why like people stay here. That's why I spent 6 of my best years there, and that's what made me me. And that's probably also the reason why we're talking about inspiration on this podcast, because that's what I associate with that city. Like that's what that city whispers to me. But yeah, after a while I feel like I would go back home every now and then and be like, I want some home food. Give me a pillow. I just wanna take a nap, because when you're living in Bombay, you're in a boxing match.
Interestingly, I came back. I mean, my plan was not to like entirely leave. I knew I wanted to come back to Bombay. This was about 2.5 years in the city. I wanted to go home, like I said, I had an injury. I was nursing and I wanted to get better, and then like eventually figure out something else in Bombay. And like whatever, I was not doing much, and like after 2 months I started feeling bored, so I was like, maybe time to like look for work again. And like, dude, randomly, no like leads. I didn't know anyone. Like I was looking at organizations that did work in sport. So a bunch of organizations popped up. I was just going through websites of like a lot of these, and side me I was interviewing for other jobs and all of that, not related to sport. Then I chanced upon OGQ's website. I was hearing of them for the first time, and like every role until then in the sport industry that had opened up, I was like, yeah, but this is not a skill set match, or this is not something that I would enjoy doing or I would be good at. Like, so I was like, okay, I want to work in the industry. I mean, it'd be nice to work in the industry, but it didn't really like match. OGQ's website, mein, there was an opening for someone to design their coach education programs ka learning and development. Learning and development modules and design the overall program itself. And the deadline had already passed. It had been like 3 months since they had said last date to apply. So that was some March 2020 or something, and I was applying in July 2020. And I was like, what's the worst that'll happen? They won't like write back or like I won't hear back. But I just wrote to them. They said email ID and I sent my CV and all. Next day call आया कि this position is still vacant. We're looking to like fill it, and will you be interested in an interview? And we went through your CV and all. And so yeah, within like 4 days, like multiple rounds of interviews and assignment, they said take 1 week. I was like, I didn't like say it out loud, but like deep down, I like really wanted to like work here, because what was exciting for me was I had been, I would say, like an amateur athlete myself. Like growing up, I wanted to like excel at sport. Followed a lot of sport. Watch like my family's sport crazy. Football, basketball, tennis, badminton. Like literally, there's sport on, and like my TV is playing that sport. Like that's how I grew up, and I still continue to follow sport passionately. And it was also like unique in the sense that it was working in elite sport. I was like, it will be nice to see what it really takes for somebody to like thrive and excel at that level. So I want to like witness some of these things. So I got in 3-4 days interview ho gaya. They said done, and I think that's how I got into OGQ. So yeah, it's been like 3.5 years now since my time here.
What do you do at OGQ? What's your role?
Yeah, so I'm still in the education space, which is like my training and core skill and the work ethics that I've had over the last few years. OGQ directly supports athletes and the sport federations through sports science support. We have a team of nutritionists, strength and conditioning people, psychologists, doctors, etc. to look after all their body, mind, sports science needs. OGQ is a non-profit organization started by two of India's sporting legends, Prakash Padukone and Geet Sethi, world sports champion 9 times. And Prakash Padukone, all of us know through his exploits at All England badminton. Their vision was that, you know, in their era when they were playing, they didn't have like the support system to really propel athletes. Like a lot of athletes, I would say back in the day, succeeded despite the system, not because of it. Their noble intentions were to kind of provide athletes, deserving athletes, with like platforms, tools, resources to really kind of help India win a gold medal at the multiple gold medals at the Olympics. So OGQ right now works in different sports. We work primarily in the able-bodied sports. We work with badminton, shooting, wrestling, weightlifting, archery, some track and field athletes, some table tennis athletes as well. And OGQ identifies talent both at the junior level and the senior level to see. We have our research team that monitors athletes in different sports around the country to identify upcoming talent or established talent to see how we can support them to kind of propel their careers to the next level through the support that we can offer that they might otherwise not get. So we support them through funding, training opportunities, equipment for certain expensive sports like shooting, archery. You know, the equipment itself is very expensive. Ammunition is expensive. Sports science support. We have a team of in-house sports science experts. So we have athlete managers who coordinate with the other resources and map them onto the athletes based on their needs to support them for like a period of time. We also support athletes in para sports, different para sports, para shooting, para badminton, para track and field, etc. So currently OGQ works with about 400 athletes in these different sports across different age groups and different kind of sports. We also have another vertical, which is where kind of my work and my team's work comes into the picture. We have a coaches education program where the goal is, after the Rio Olympics, after our kind of dissecting like what worked, what didn't work, following the Rio Olympics in 2016, OGQ realized that, we are equipping the athletes with all the support, but there's also a need for coaches to be educated. Because India mein kya hota hai, if you've been a successful athlete, your natural transition is to, after your playing days, to become a coach. But it's not necessary that you will be a successful coach because you've been a successful athlete. It takes an entirely different set of skills. It could in fact work against you because you'll feel what worked for you might work for somebody else also. So it's almost counterintuitive that way. But sure, there have been several examples of successful athletes who've gone on to become very successful coaches as well. But we realized that there was not a lot of opportunities for coaches to upskill themselves. Like there's every decade there's a big transition in terms of how the sport is played. Like if you follow basketball, you'll know 90s is so different from what it is like today. Like football, the same. Every sport goes through those transitions. So if you're an athlete in the 90s, you need to know like how sport works in modern day to kind of support your athletes better.
Because the meta keeps changing.
Select high performance coaches coaches who work with not only the elite athletes, but also like budding athletes who want to make a career in sport. It's basically a learning and development program. We train them on the technical aspect of the sport itself. We get experts, subject matter experts, to work with them on the technical aspects of it. We do like leadership training for the coaches, because sometimes they don't just work with the athlete, they work with an entire academy. They manage a group of coaches under them. They work with parents, they work with the governing body. So like a lot of stakeholders to manage. We also train them on the advancements in sports science, advancements in nutrition, strength and conditioning, how to work with your sports science support staff. So this is like, so we have 3 tiers to the program. We have a foundation program, which is a 3-month online basic course. Excellence program is for like thoda more high performance level. We take a smaller cohort, and we have a leadership program, which is exclusively for like the creme de la creme, if I can call it that. So my work involves basically designing the course material, designing the program experience for them, working with the subject matter experts. Because to give you an example, like let's say we work with a prominent nutritionist to train these coaches. That person might be very skilled in their subject matter knowledge and expertise, but to teach and train and to deliver content takes a thoda different skill set, which is where I help them to kind of put together their learning materials, their delivery strategy. And I think for me the most 2 interesting things about this work, everything I've done before, this is also where I will perhaps never see the results of it. The work that I do now, it will probably happen 10 years from now, because like working with kids, you'll probably kind of see how well they've done for themselves once they finish college and make a career for themselves. Same with coaches, because you train a coach now, and the coaches are measured by the success of their athletes. So for that athlete to kind of be impacted by the coach's training to kind of perform at the highest level, there are 2 links to it. So it'll take a much longer time. So I think that's interesting for you to see what can you do to make impact visible. Like Abhilaksh, you said OGQ, when we work with athletes, impact is directly measurable in terms of the medals that you win. But like, what's your benchmark for how do you measure whether coaches are succeeding or not? So that's been an interesting piece for me to kind of learn, explore, and see what the measure of success in the sporting world for a coach is. That's been interesting for me.
You went from being an athlete yourself to teaching sports to now teaching the people who sort of teach sports, right? So you're just going like that's been your journey. I have a question. Feel with the job that you do today, where you're building these curriculums to enable coaches to do the best. What are some of the things that you feel today that you also felt maybe while actually teaching or while playing sports? Are there any, like, do you feel the same level of excitement? What is it like?
it's excitement, but it's like I'm not at the center of it. Like I'm not like when you're an athlete or when you're working directly with kids, you're at the center of it, organizing things for yourself or for the kids. Here, it's more of a backstage kind of role. Uh, I think from an impact point of view, this makes sense. Like in terms of the number of coaches that you can
Yeah.
impact in this role is obviously way more than, let's say, you directly work with a group of kids. Yeah, I think I haven't looked at it like that. I haven't looked at it as a progression. I haven't looked at it, okay, I became an athlete, then I became a teacher who taught sports to kids, then I worked in an organization. I didn't look at it like that. These are all things that when the opportunity came, I just took it. There was not too much. I didn't map it out and say like, okay, like this is how my graph kind of looks like. So opportunity came, I took it. So that's how this all played out. But I think for me, max satisfaction is actually not for the athletes who will go on to become eventual champions and elite athletes, because somebody is going to become, out of 100 kids in an academy or out of 500 kids in like a state, somebody is going to become like champion. Somebody is going to become national champion in India every year, right? So some kids are obviously like going to really have an upward trajectory. And they're going to kind of bring pride to the Indian flag, if you can call it that. Win medals at the Asian Games, Olympics. वो सब होगा. मतलब I feel a good system is in place sooner rather than later. I mean, fingers crossed. Also, Olympics is 2 months away. I hope we'll see a better performance this year. But for me, it has always, like, I've always tried to put myself as an athlete. What kind of coach did I want? I think deep down, like I told you, like belief was lacking. I knew I was not going to like make it to the highest level. But like hundreds of thousands of kids play sport who want to become good at sport, who will not end up taking sport as a profession. They will go on to do different kinds of jobs. They'll go on to become doctors, engineers, whatever. Like, I'm sure that there are newer fields that you can choose today. But I also see this as a very critical phase for them. This learning that happens, like I've always believed that you'll never forget a good teacher. So I think the impact, I think sometimes we undermine the impact that teachers have on kids growing up. Like simple things like how you treat athletes with respect, how you show empathy, how you kind of conduct yourselves in certain high pressure situations. Like kids imitate. That's how they learn. Like a lot of it is learned through imitation, and then they process. Oh, मैंने इसीलिए ऐसा किया. Like at our age, they realize this is why this happened.
Yeah.
But growing up, they imitate actions of elders. So for them to have good role models, even if they won't make it big in sport, I think that's what gives me like a lot of satisfaction, like working with coaches.
So, what you just said, right? It reminded me of a teacher I had in the 8th grade. So, I was in the US that year, and I loved the way that they taught us in public school, which was so different from anything I had experienced in India before. And I know that the world likes to shit on public education a lot, right? And in the US, around that time, you had like TV shows, you had a lot of social commentary going on that really talked about how, especially in the wake of George Bush, the public education system has just become so much worse, and kids have like such difficulty actually getting good learning outcomes. But I, as somebody that was transplanted from India to there, couldn't get enough of it, right? But at the end of the year, I had to come back to India, and around that time, like what happens is when you're graduating from middle school to high school, a counselor shows up from high school, sits with you, and decides what subjects you'll take in high school. And you basically like select all your electives and your core subjects and stuff like that. And I didn't sit for those sessions because I was like, I'm going back to India, so what's the point? But then they called me on the intercom, right? They said, come to the principal's office. You need to do the counseling. And I was like, well, what the hell will I do with it? They're like, come anyway, right? So I showed up to the principal's office, and my counselor, like the middle school counselor, who was this lady who was one of the only teachers who properly pronounced my name, which is very difficult for a lot of white people. She was sitting there, and I explained the same logic to her that, hey, since I'm going back to India, I don't think this makes sense for me to do. And she said, screw it, do it anyway, who cares, right? So then she and the high school counselor sat with me, gave me like a whole list of subjects. And I ended up selecting Algebra 1, Algebra 2,
Yeah.
Geometry 3, all in the same term, right? I took all the advanced placement courses, and I took like a course in photography, and like just put it all together because I wanted to learn everything they had to teach. And at one point, the high school counselor was like, don't you think this is a bit much for just one person? Like, won't you have trouble learning all of this? Won't it get difficult? And before I could say anything, right, the middle
Yeah.
school counselor said he can do it. And I was just awestruck because I was like, I was going to roll some of this back
Yeah.
because I didn't believe that I'd be able to do it. Like what that high school counselor said sort of wormed its way into
Yeah.
my mind. But then this other person immediately showed faith that I can. And that changed the entire perspective I had on like
Yeah.
on selecting subjects. I figured, fuck it, if she believes I can do it, I can do it, right? But the other thing I keep thinking about is that when I look at your story, Andy, it's like a fairy tale almost, right? You start off in a sporting family, you end up playing a lot of sports, and then injury happens, which forces you to introspect and think about what other options are out there. But you still end up in a situation where sports continues to be a big part of what you do, and you impact other people's lives with it. And then you join a company that is fully focused on sporting greatness and
Yeah.
maximizing it for this country and uplifting people through the power of sport. It sounds like a very
Yeah.
straightforward journey when the way you say it, especially because you have such an upbeat and optimistic way of talking about it, right? But there must have been times where it felt bleak, right? It felt like this isn't how it'll play out. And the reason I say this is because
Yeah.
back in the day, right, me and Ronit were heavily involved in parliamentary debating when we were in college. And debating is something that debaters take incredibly seriously.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate to get some success at the national level in debating, but we've seen a lot of juniors who we coached get absolutely dejected when they lose tournaments, when they realize that their opportunities to win those trophies are going to run out because they'll have to rejoin the real world after college. And we've seen international debaters who went to the world championships and lost find excuses to come back,
Yeah.
to continue
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
compete. They'll take like fake degrees in random ass colleges just so that they can come back to compete and win that trophy that eluded them, right? So what was clear to me was that there's a lot of heartbreak that you have to deal with when the way that you imagined that dream playing out doesn't work out. So I want to know, what was that like for you, right? It must have been a struggle at different points, right?
Yeah.
Grappling with the reality that you might have to leave professional sports as an athlete behind. And how did you deal with that?
I think the coolest thing is to see adults give up control and give decision making power to the kids. Sports में मतलब more so than school teaching, sports में क्या होता है, we have this culture of being strict disciplinarians. I say you do kind of culture, right? What is that? That renders the athletes powerless because somebody says and you have to do it, no choice, no talking back, all of that. What happens when you kind of give them control over their choices, which is kind of like, so like I'm just trying to go into specifics of the mindset shift that the work that we do is trying to kind of bring up. What are the power dynamics between a coach and an athlete? Should an athlete be able to talk back to you? Yeah. Should an athlete come up with their own plan as to how they want to train today? Should an athlete be able to decide their strategy for which tournaments to play and which tournaments to skip? What does that control look like? It's empowering. Like, it's in terms of, you tell a 13-year-old, you take a call as to how you want to play. Suddenly there's energy. They're like, I have 10 different ideas. And coaches also understand, like once they see that shift in attitude of athletes taking more ownership, control of their own, how they want to do. Okay, success though is like ऐसा up downs, you'll win some, you'll lose some, it'll go where it has to go. But I think this kind of, for kids to have this kind of control and the teachers to just be facilitators of learning rather than the drivers of the learning itself. I think that's massive for, and if you're able to do one coach who trains 40 kids that way, and if you're able to train 100 coaches, then that's 4,000 kids who look at their own kind of abilities and their creativity and that kind of stuff in a different way. So I think like that's something that I would say we're very excited about. I think the hardest part was accepting that you're not going to for me, at least in this journey, it was accepting you are not going to make it as an elite athlete. I think that was because you train a certain way, you do certain things, and then you realize what you envisioned will be your next 10-15 years. It's not going to be that way. However, I won't paint it as a sob story or whatever. Like, I made these choices. I had the option. Like, it's not like मेरे घर में force किया कि नहीं you have to stop playing and do this. In fact, they're like क्या हुआ इसको? Why is he doing this kind of thing? So it was a fully conscious choice. But for myself, there was a lot of conflicting feelings. ठीक है, 2 और साल try करते हैं, उसके बाद देखते हैं क्या होता है. That kind of thing was there. But I think I made the decision and I went through with it, and then the feelings hit later. Once you're away and not playing for 2-3 months, you see your friends and your peers are doing other things, whatever. I think that was difficult to come to terms with. Yeah, but I don't think I would have it another way. I think especially the 2 years of TFI ka experience was, I don't think I would have ever had perspective. I would have been able to develop the skills that I currently possess, shape my own personal value system based on certain experiences that I've had, connect with so many like-minded people. I think those are all I would not trade them for other things. So I think that was hard. Elite athletes who finish their playing careers and come to OGQ, or people who worked with the elite sports system a really, really long time who come into the organization. Initially, I felt what the fuck am I doing here? Because I'm not qualified to be here. Because my seniors were international level players. My CEO is the national, former captain of the Indian hockey team. You have Olympians on the team. So I'm I have context on sport, but the level that I played at is it's not the same league at all. So the demands of placed on an elite athlete so different. I would say I don't think it's a fair comparison to say मैंने भी sport खेला है with all the other people who played sport for India and at the Asian Games and stuff like that, right? I don't even bring it up in conversation itna. So I felt a little bit of not feeling sure as to whether I would fit. But again, organization, very sporty, encouraging, people who will back you to the end. I think I said, I've always lucked out with a good ecosystem wherever I work. And I think that's for some, I think I know my personality, at least I need thoda reassurance, thoda support and people to back me in certain situations. I think thankfully that has happened, and that initial kind of uncertainty has withered away after a while.
So Andy, tell us one thing. What inspires you today, and how do you think we can take some of that in our own lives?
I think really cool things can be done when a lot of people with similar intentions come together. I've always believed in that, whether it is with me as an athlete, with my peers and coaches, or me in TFI, with my support system around me. I don't think we should look at success as one person did it. In fact, we should strive for a lot of people to come together. For me, having fun at work is super important, and that actually gives me fuel to enjoy. So when a lot of people who want to do good work, who want to kind of create a dent, so to speak, come together, I think then a lot of stuff is possible. But like off late, I think what's really like inspiring me is, you know, I'm hitting my late 20s. I mean, I'm going to be 30 like in a few months. And you know, there's this weird feeling of shit, like, have I like missed out on something? Am I getting old kind of thing pops in. But then I see like athletes, LeBron James at 39, you know, athletes like that who are still like not just making up the numbers, but being a force to reckon with, dominating the league, playing with like maintaining top conditioning at like age 39. You know, his peers are like 22 years old. His recovery probably takes the longest. His healing from injury takes the longest. He's not as fast. He's not as sharp as he probably used to be. But for him to still like put in the work at 39.
Excellent. I think we've had a cracker of an episode today. I have really enjoyed this whole conversation and just all the insight that came out about sports, right? And to me,
Yeah.
I am somebody that has had like a very hate relationship with sports, and I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that
Yeah.
like nobody in my family plays sports, and like I was always like the new kid in school, so I got picked last, and like I could never stay in one place long enough to like get good at anything. And it wasn't that I didn't find it interesting. I think I'm a naturally very competitive person, and I understand the intellectual side of sports. Yeah, so like I like the focus on tactics, on psychology, on all of that, right? On the history of how different teams ended up winning, different players got over humps and things like that. But I keep thinking about how when I first started to learn boxing 4 years ago, I had a coach who he was like a very good boxer himself. He was a fighter, professional, and I thought that that was what I needed, right? And like I needed somebody who's been in the cage, because who else can teach me how to like be in a fight, right? But I've always had like a deep fear of getting hurt, and that's made it difficult for me to play sports where you can get hurt, right? Like if somebody's kicking a ball at you, it can hit your head, but you have to keep your eyes open, right? And like you gotta fucking hit it with your forehead in the right way, with the right angle. You can't do that if you give in to that fear, right? So a big part of why boxing was so hard was because you're getting punched in the face, and nobody likes to be punched in the face. And I really wanted to get good at it, because I've always been like a small kid, right? Bullying, shit like that. Like this was a way for me to get back that control and that agency, right? But
Yeah.
my coach used to pair me up with this kid who was like 4 or 5 years younger than me. And when I used to spar with that kid would just beat the crap out of me, right? Like, I mean, he wasn't hitting me like super hard, but I just couldn't get like any space to think about when I should make my move, right? And I just like cower away, and then the coach would yell, he's like, "Don't fucking turn away," right? Like that's the last thing you're supposed to do. And I think after one session, like I could hear the frustration in his voice, right? And then like when I went to get water, I just like I broke down in tears, like because I was just so overwhelmed by what had happened, right? Like I was like,
Yeah.
why the fuck can't I get good at this, right? I want it so badly, but it's like my nature prevents me um, from getting what I want, which is just the ability to fucking throw a punch and not to cower away when like somebody tries to hit me, right? And I remember around that time, like I went on Reddit, and there's this lady named
Yeah.
Sylvie who went to Thailand and became one of the first Western women to professionally compete in Muay Thai and like get success. And
Yeah.
I dropped her like a long DM where I said, I'm training with the best MMA gym in India, and I've got like this coach who's been in fights, and I suck. I just can't get better. So what do I do, right? And she said, look, just because it's the best coach in India doesn't mean it's the best coach for you, right? And your specific needs and what will help you get to where you need to be might come from somebody else. So you should open up your avenues and look for different people that can do that, right? And I've like part of me felt like a loser. I felt like, okay, she's just dismissing what I'm saying. I want to be here with the best of the best. I want to get better. But then, like, over the years, I've realized she was right, right? Everybody, and especially
Mm.
like through this conversation with you, I've realized that a big part of what you do is giving people the right circumstances to excel. And that is truly, truly inspiring to me.
Yeah, I feel like, Andy, what you've left me with is this really, really powerful idea of sports as a means of education that I feel like is not celebrated enough today. And it's something that I probably really want to see celebrated more as a real means of education outside of the classroom. Because throughout your story, I feel like, and you've said this twice, you said that when you grew up, your dad gave you your parents rather, and your family
Yeah.
and your school gave you the values that you always have to go out and play, like regardless of anything. That's something that's important. And then when you were at TFI or when you were volunteering,
Yeah.
that's the same value that you said you tried to inculcate in those kids as well. That regardless of anything, you just have to play. You bought the balls and like you bought balls and like got the equipment so that they could play. So it's sort of just a recurring theme that's embedded in you, which is it is a fundamentally important like learning experience that you can only gain when you're on the field. And I think that's something that as kids in India or
Yeah.
wherever, when you play in a park, you learn some of these things, the competitive spirit. And I feel like as I grew up as an adult, I lost out on playing sports every
Yeah.
day. Like I used to play as a kid, like you said, every day from 5 to 7 after school, and I used to feel energetic and recharged and activated. And I lost that feeling of like being paired in a with some random my friends, but like in a random team. And for that moment when I'm playing football in that team, those
Yeah.
teammates are people that I care about so much, and all, all of us have this spirit of wanting to win. And like if
Yeah.
you don't continue to play that, you sort of completely lose out on those feelings. Like I don't really feel that feeling anymore in my life because I'm not engaged in that activity. I'm not actively participating in team sports like that. And I just feel like I take away from this conversation that I recollect that that's a feeling that I used to have, and I deeply miss it. I want to feel it again, because that feeling was like my probably youngest. You reminded me that that feeling is probably my youngest and the simplest feeling of like feeling inspired and excited and wanting to go like after this like very simple goal of scoring a goal with the help of my team. Thanks for that. And yeah, it's been an absolutely beautiful
Mm.
conversation. I think our listeners would love to hear this.